Welcome to Below the Line, where we talk about working in Hollywood from the crew perspective. My name is Skid. I'm a former assistant director and your host.
Quiet on the set.
Today we're talking about Rumours. That's Rumours with two U's, Rumours, how the British and Canadians spell it. This 2024 film, currently playing in theaters, is a black comedy about a gathering of the G7 world leaders that descends into chaos. And my guest today is the film's cinematographer, Stefan Ciupek. Stefan, welcome to Below the Line.
Thank you so much. I'm very glad to be part of your podcast.
Glad to have you here. And I think this is going to be a fun film to talk about. A warning for listeners, today's conversation will contain spoilers. A little context right out of the gate. As regular listeners are aware, I live in DC. My wife works for the US government and specifically in the area of international trade. So when I watched this film, I was accompanied by a group of friends, all of whom have pre-existing knowledge of and opinions about the G7. Now, when we discussed the film afterwards, the takeaways ranged from this is the most accurate depiction of G7 discussions that I've ever seen to what the fuck did we exactly just watch? Now, also included everything in between. It was a very lively discussion. To start our conversation, Stefan, is it fair to use a word like absurd to describe this film? Or is that a misunderstanding of what the filmmaking team, yourself included, was trying to achieve?
No, absolutely. I think you're absolutely right on track. It is. When I read the script first, when I got it sent by the directors, I just couldn't stop laughing. And I started researching a little bit about the G7, thinking like this is taking a little bit too far. But when I started watching a few of their reference videos, they've done that research a little earlier, obviously, as they wrote the scripts. Actually, I thought just looking at how the G7 meetings just visually, like look at them assembling without any sound, don't even listen to their conversations, just their body language. They are better than any comedian can be. I think it's going to be hard for any actor to match or come on top of their actual, their caricatures larger than life in some way. So I felt that, well, actually, it is actually quite true, some of it, to some extent. And that's what we're kind of experiencing, in a larger sense, our world is tumbling from one catastrophe, war, political disasters, and catastrophes, and economical and environmental massive things are happening around the world, and the leaders seem to kind of steer their ship, sometimes not even really knowing which way to go. And it is kind of in that sense, I think this film is capturing a little bit of what we experience right now in real life, this kind of helplessness, but also like their focus on maybe not the most important topics in life.
And we're going to talk some more about specific examples about how that's captured on film. But tell me, Stefan, how this came together. Of note is that this film has three directors, Guy Maddin, Johnson, and Galen Johnson. Now, I've never been in a situation like that. When you have three directors, from the planning to the execution, as a cinematographer, how did that work for you?
Yeah. First of all, I was when I met them for the first time, we actually came together to be working on another film. So we were preparing another film online with lots of Zoom meetings. That film didn't end up happening, but it was a great opportunity of us getting to know each other and kind of working together, at least remotely, and getting to know each other's mind and spirit. And I worked with two directors before, but three directors definitely was a new thing. But my worries were completely, I could put them aside fairly fast because they are actually quite aligned in their vision. They have very, very different journeys in life and very different style. But because I think they're very, very connected in how they visually want to, or also storytelling wise, approach films. And they've made 3 films before together, and so they've had this collaboration before. And I feel like they're supplementing each other in ways as they do as filmmakers. So each of them have different kind of skill sets, and they kind of come to life. So Evan Johnson has written the script and kind of was very, very into all the details of the story and the characters. And Galen is very kind of, while shooting, Galen was mostly with me by the monitor and kind of looking at the visual world of it, and kind of be very focused on the visual style because he's a very good photographer as well. and a visual artist, and he's also a sound designer. So later in post-production, he was very much working the sound design. But I think it was always an open room for us to discuss ideas, thoughts, and that was kind of a very nice thing. It was like instead of having one person for me to work with, was three directors, and each of them contributed quite a lot to the story. And I think what we see here is like a collage of three directors' minds on a screen and a sound design. And it was a great opportunity to work this way and experience that this way. And they're all great artists and have great taste in this field. And sometimes when you work in creative fields, you see different, very strong, different opinions and fights and stuff about things. But in this case, it was quite aligned, and they kind of, it was kind of more expanding discussions and questioning things, which drove us to go deeper into the subject matter. And yeah. So it was a very interesting and good collaboration.
As directors, they have a track record of working in this experimental film space, I'd say. You also have history working some experimental films and also some cutting edge technology approach. Tell me how your experience made you a good match for these directors specifically.
First, when I started watching their films, first their collaborations together, like The Forbidden Room and Green Fork, but also Guy Maddin's earlier work, that is actually the cinema that I mostly aspire to since I became a cinematographer. Their work is visually so intriguing and interesting and captivating. So when I saw their work, I immediately thought that this would be great expansion of my own journey, because quite often me working in narrative structures, directors are not in classical cinema not that brave to go visually as far as they do, whereas they have been mostly very, very inviting to even be more brave and daring than they are. So it's kind of more an uplifting creative process versus like normally me suggesting something, and quite often directors take it down. Don't make it so dark. Don't make it so colorful. Whereas here it's like, can I see it more colorful? Can we go darker? Can we do something more bold? What about this movement? So there's a very few filmmakers who are going to that extent extreme. And also, if you work with them, very often the other filmmakers I worked with, they have one particular style they kind of follow through and they tone it a bit with the films. Whereas I feel like with Guy, Evan, and Galen, they have this entire oeuvre and journey through very different filmic stories and collages. So I feel like with them, you can just mix and match so many different styles into one film together. And especially Rumours was very inviting about that. It's not a one stylistic film. It's genre bending and mind bending. So it was as if you're touching into the bravest approach into each genre and put them all together into one film.
Give us a sense of what the overall umbrella was from a production perspective. How many days? Where did you film? Just kind of like what the challenges were in putting together the plan.
So we were shooting in Hungary, all close to Budapest for funding reasons, because that's where, part of the funding structure came. It was, first of all, a Canadian production, but co-production with Germany together and with Hungary. And we had about 23 days of shooting the film, which is, I always was a bit worried about. That's very, very little. When I read the script and thought, I just have a very good sense of how much time I need, I thought minimum 30 days because it's very actors driven. There's always 7 actors, at least, sometimes 8, 9 actors in each scene. So it's very, very kind of actors and dialogue heavy, which, means you just need a lot of time. Then it's at night, set at night in the forest. So that also gives quite a few challenges of working there. So yeah, 23 days were quite a sporty attempt to make this film happen, especially because it's cinema, it's not television, and it was supposed to feel like cinema. These schedules I've done on television quite often, but then you shoot 2, 3 cameras and long lenses and you just kind of get away with so much more. Whereas here, I just really felt each actor should get their distinct signature close-up. So I wanted to work a bit more cinematically.
Well, I don't want to talk about the ensemble cast and the challenges of covering them, but tell me first. So there's this gazebo where a lot of the early action takes place. Was that also an exterior somewhere, or did you actually build a gazebo and use some green screens on stage?
We had different approaches to that and different to begin with. There was one thought, well, let's just build a gazebo. Let's find a landscape, put it there. and let's do all the coverage we need to do over there. Let's do a night shoot and a day shoot and get it all done. But that's where I kind of stepped in, and like with the first AD, we just kind of thought feeling that first of all, we need to give cast and crew some rest, because there's gonna be lots of night shoots already with this film set at night in the forest. So giving them some daytime possibilities is great. And also on location outside, it's very hard to shoot 6, 7 pages a day. Like this is like a lot of coverage. So to get a more controlled environment, to get more control also on the lighting side, I really pushed hard for having a split. So basically we have the arrival at the gazebo and we do it for real. We put the gazebo into the park landscape, and the first exterior scenes are done there for real. And then we'll move that gazebo for all the close coverage into the blue screen studio stage and shoot everything controlled. And that's also where I could then make maximum use of multiple camera shooting and work really, really fast.
So tell me more about the challenges of filming these scenes where you have 7 principal actors, all of whom are going to need coverage. You're right. Like that's not just a matter of shooting a couple of page scene. You've got all the reactions and the back and forths. What was that like?
That was very intense. My biggest worry, kind of how to get through, even make it through the day, because when you have a scene with 7 actors, you first of all want it to be kind of well rehearsed and blocked and staged, and all of these things take time. So, and we didn't have much time to pre-rehearse. So there was a script reading session, a read-through session, and then some notes from the directors. But we actually first time really saw the scene playing out in the forest at night, where we were kind of shooting it. So we gave it time a little bit, to kind of, and we had, because shooting scenes at night, you're a little bit limited, and you have to kind of decide in advance where the scene is playing out which way, because I have to pre-light them and have to have everything ready. We had always a kind of game plan of how the staging should look like. Is it on the move? Are they static? How is the conversation happening? But then you have to give the actors, as they develop a scene, 7 actors, some room for that, right? One actor wants to walk across and the other one wants to have a confrontational dialogue. So it's kind of all continuously subject of change. And it was very kind of challenging to kind of keep it in the time that we were given and keep all those close-ups in mind, because for each scene you have to do a wide shot, and you also have to do each actor has to get a close-up, and they have to light that close-up and get all these things done. So the approach was to make that happen, to have like a stage, give them space. So the stage the size of like half a soccer field in the forest that I kind of pre-lit, and then kind of locking us into a direction of 200 degrees angle. So basically trying to avoid any actor crossing this line. And then within that, I gave the actors a lot of space to develop the scene and work on the dynamics they needed to have. Then I was basically, the first rehearsals I was shooting with my iPhone just quickly to get an idea of a scene. And then I had to very quickly say, does it work, does it not work, what to change? And I have to, in mind, keep how one actor's position affects 6 other actors' close-ups. It's quite a complicated thing. So it's been some kind of 3-dimensional mind chess game. I had to speed chess that I had to constantly play, knowing how does it affect the angle, how does it affect the lighting, and how does it affect the time that we have for the scene? Because we were shooting partly as fast as you do in a studio in a sitcom setup, and it's not at all that thing, and it should never look like this. So it was a big challenge, but we found a way to come across. So I had the A camera was mostly on a Steadicam, so it could move dynamically with the leading actor of a scene. So I normally use that camera to take after take, follow through the leads, and then B camera was on a crane or on dolly track to cover the close-ups of the other actors. But it all had to be laid out in advance, the tracks laid out, and all kind of very, very meticulously prepared, with giving them space and freedom, obviously, to adjust things.
How did the actors take to this? I mean, and it's not for any shade, but I know actors that I've worked with that they could not perform under the kind of conditions you're describing. Like it's an extra set of things that it might not have worked for them, but this team seems to have delivered.
Amazingly. So it was just stunning and amazing to see how Well, they were all prepared. I mean, some days they had to have 5 to 8 pages of complicated dialogues remembered. And they literally very often were fine with just doing 1 or 2 takes. There's hardly any scene where we went further than 1 or 2 takes. And that's a huge kudos to the preparation of the actors that they spend a lot of time building each character they're playing from within and giving those characters so much detail and then also being able to improvise within the settings that we had. It was really a wonderful experience, and all actors were shining throughout in this process. And it was just like amazing to see this come together and the energy come together. I mean, it was all played so well that behind the monitors, quite often I just had to continue focus on my job. I was actually laughing so much because of seeing the script come to life. You know, there was so much humor there, so it was hard to focus sometimes. But an amazing experience, very rewarding to kind of be part of this.
And while this group of actors have a slew of great credits among them, the ensemble is headlined by Cate Blanchett.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'd be curious to hear what your experience of working with her specifically was.
Cate, she was just the most incredible and amazing person to work with. I mean, they were all fabulous, amazing, but what was so special about her in this setting is how she plays with camera, how she understands the framing and lighting and all these dynamics. After rehearsal, we record a rehearsal, she would watch playback to see the frame. And I don't very often have actors asking for to see playback, maybe for performance reasons, but she would look at those takes of those playbacks to see the frame as a staging area. Because she comes from theater, she understands my frame is a stage. And then she's just making use so well of that frame as her staging area. It's amazing how she is able to give all these little detailed acting moments on a journey of a complicated tracking shot at exactly the right moment. This understanding of what camera does within time and space. This was just an incredible experience. Very, very, very special to see that working out.
I want to ask you some questions about specific scenes, whether the choices you made as the director of photography, or maybe some specific challenges just in the execution of these scenes you had. And feel free to hop us around if you want to tie things to other scenes as well.
Mm-hmm.
But I was struck the first time on the cinematography when there's some flashbacks that you chose to do in black and white.
Yeah, partly Guy and the directors love black and white film in a way. And they always like 80% of their work has been, is black and white, and they kind of love this noirish feel of that. So they definitely wanted to have one scene there. And black and white as a flashback scene is kind of the most extreme of flashback visualizations you can do, and also kind of quite traditional and classic. And then we just went along with that. And yeah, and we kind of, besides it being black and white, we went very intense on the film grain which we created in post-production for those sequence, and went for a more dramatic backlighting, and used a lot of layered fog, which is anyway a storytelling part of the film, these layered fogs everywhere. But actually for the flashback sequence, we intensified that even more to give it this moody, eerie, noirish 1930s style.
Now, speaking of the 1930s, and maybe I should have asked this question first, I understand that you were using some older lenses on this project. Before we get into specifics on how you changed different scenes, was there a general approach that sort of set the tone for everything?
Well, the general approach was kind of evolving as we were preparing the film. And as you've seen the film, it's such a big genre bending mix of different genres, right? And it was clear to me that it had to be coming with this extreme humoristic, surreal storyline. We had to do some very brave visual choices as well. And when I set together the directors and we looked at reference films, they were so different from each other. We're looking at films from Buñuel, from Kurosawa, and then the Green Knight, the recent film. So very, very different films. And we responded to different things there. And then we spent one day as well before we started shooting in a forest, like preparing. I wanted to, because the directors have never worked outside of a studio. They've never worked in a forest location at night. So they've seen it all on films, but the practical way of how it all works and how to visualize it. So we spent one night with a full setup of lighting towers and fog machines, and stand-ins to kind of just show them the different possibilities of color and backlight and sidelight, like by all the visual options that we have in the forest. We kind of did the whole workshop together in the forest. It was very exciting to do that. And there, as we cycled through different colors and I showed them different combinations, I saw their reactions to certain things. So sometimes they would come back to me and say, this scene, let's just make this scene in deeply saturated yellow, or let's do this green and magenta. So they were very kind of within scenes brave to explore this. So I think there's not a one approach, there's not one reference, but there's so many different genres baked into the film that at some point we gave up references to other films and actually created our own thing, and just obviously having a certain imagery in mind. So, I mean, the whole beginning is kind of very high key. It had to have a bit of a feeling of a G7 documentary, people coming together, but in a filmic sense. So I lit it all very high key, nearly in a soap opera style, giving them a golden backlight, you know. And then obviously the music and the context of the first humorous dialogues also like kind of covers within that. And when the light fades away and they are all left behind, left alone on the journey into the forest, things go very dark and eerie, and we backlight the fog, and we kind of get this kind of genre film, zombie movie feel into the colors and moods of the film. So we played a lot with that, and to have one constant factor, which, because they love the look of old films, 1930s, 1940s, and all like old films. So I started exploring different options, what lenses to use. And one set of lenses that I really loved in all my testings was the original 1930s Cooke S2 lens set, which basically was originally from 1936, this one, and rehoused. So it is actually original glass from 30s. Those lenses on its own just give this beautiful fall off to the sides, and the way they render light and images and the softness and the glowiness that those lenses have, and also how they capture close-ups. These lenses were literally designed to capture close-ups, was just kind of very, very beautiful. And we used those lenses as one set for the entire film. And that is kind of part of a look that carries through. Different levels of diffusion filters we used for different elements of the film, but then basically this was my constant factor, and the rest was basically done entirely with lighting and more or less fog and lighting style changes. To explain a bit more about this, I used to be a colorist, a digital film colorist, and I've graded more than 100 films. And so my journey has been the journey through color my entire life. And I was so excited to have a film finally as a cinematographer, where it's not just one or two looks that you kind of explore within the film, but I can use my entire skill set as a former colorist on this film. And my approach was different this way. So basically, I made sure I had all the lights in the forest were all controllable by an iPad, and I could adjust the colors. They were all RGB LED lights, so I could change the color of each light. And I was literally having my little setup next to the camera and monitors, and I was grading the lights in the forest. And we were very spontaneously painting the scenes with lights. And they were very receptive. The directors were very, very amazed and receptive about this process, because they could also like try things. We could try a scene in like golden amber or magenta, just cycle through colors and do what feels right for the scene. I wanted for them to have that kind of freedom to explore that.
There were a couple of scenes where color specifically caught my attention, and there may have been other scenes that you want to reference that aren't on my list. But for example, Canada runs away, and then there's purple uplighting in the forest.
Mm-hmm.
And then later they're at the ferry, and you've made it very clearly orange lighting.
Mm-hmm.
And then we get to the end with the castle stuff. And again, we could talk about all these more details, but then it's red. So are you saying you discovered these colors in the filming of those scenes, or there was a larger arc about these colors were going to be used for these pivotal turning points?
Very interesting. We wanted to build, as I do with all my films, a structural arc of colors and use of things. And well, it worked out to a certain extent that we kind of narrowed down. We don't want naturalistic moonlight in this film. Everything should be slightly different. So on developing the color style of the film, the look of the daytime sequences was kind of settled, and the general mood of night and the black and white stuff But for things like the lovemaking scene between the Canadian and the German Prime Minister, Roy and Kate, that was entirely bathed in purple lights. That, for example, was really, really, I remembered in the night light test where I spoke about, they reacted very intensely to those colors. They loved it and didn't quite know where to use it from. Then they would just literally at the moment when we are staging the scene, or when we found the location for the scene, they said, let's make this scene in this purple, magenta, deep colored light. It was a very kind of intuitive, an artist's choice of a brush. It's not always to be explained in advance, but I feel like this was the approach. And the same with the fairy, in a way. We wanted it to feel very different to the rest of the forest, and it should have its own little zone in the film. So we went for this really deep yellow amber look of this scene. So it was a very intuitive, but then brave choice. And the interesting thing is about it, we didn't change any of these things in post-production color grading. So most of the time we stayed true to our color choices and everything. Yeah.
And do you think that informs the actors' performances as well? By using the actual colors, they can get a different sense of where you're going. Or again, when there's so many things going on in their heads, maybe that's one too much.
No, it is actually part of that. I strongly believe that an actor is responding to his environment. So when you go in very extreme color, like in the lovemaking scene or by the lake, the first reaction when the actors arrived was like being a bit mesmerized by this look of it. So I think in this case, yes, actors can respond to it and they can dive in, and it gives them also a sense of maybe taking the content of a scene a notch further, because this is not going to be a traditional, Ken Loach drama where it's all going to be, gritty documentary style, but it's actually something else, So I definitely think it's going to help the actors, and it did, I think, in our case.
I also want to ask you about a couple of scenes just to get a sense of what it took to pull it off. And one thing might seem silly, but there's a scene where the Canadian Prime Minister is carrying the person from France. I don't see how that person, for the shots the length of view had, certainly had some kind of lift, or, I mean, eventually they find a wheelbarrow, which certainly helps. As an AD, I just was like, whew, thank goodness for the wheelbarrow. Yes. But how was he carrying him around before that? How did you film that with those guys?
Well, I mean, that was one of the last remaining riddles and puzzles we had to fix, because they had the strong idea he's being carried around and then he's in a wheelbarrow. And we had to find devices for which it actually works. It was actually a mix of our special effects team and the stunt team to come up with the idea. They built for old people, this kind of roller, how do you call this thing where old people, they need support, carrying support?
The handles, and then it's got wheels on it as well,
exactly.
Right? So yes.
So imagine something like this, a bigger frame kind of with 4 wheels, and we could put the actor, he was literally in a very comfortable kind of molds sitting in there, and was framed in such a way that we just about missed the supporting carrying frame. But he was literally sitting in a 4-wheeled device. We tucked the actor in and pretending, and then the camera was moving a bit to pretend it's not just rolling but moving. But we thought it should be like we thought about things like having a supporting wire rig and things, complicated stuff. But then the solution was a very simple one in the end. But we had to laugh about it. It was really like getting to that point was a hard mind work, hard thinking to get to that solution. And even the wheelbarrow, as simple as it sounds, we were never really, most of the time, we weren't allowed to have the actor in a free rolling wheelbarrow because there's the risk of, letting it fall or letting it slide.
Oh, right.
So for all the shots where you see the actor, actually the wheelbarrow has 4 additional support wheels, and it's being pulled, so it's never being lifted, it's just being pulled. And whenever you see a wide shot of the actor, we had a dummy of the actor. So there was a dummy. It was a funny thing. We called him floppy. So we had a copy of the actor looking pretty much exactly the same, just very ridiculously like unreal. But sometimes when you saw the floppy somewhere in the dark, somewhere sitting, you just thought it was the actor. So several times, both Kate and us actually reacted to the puppet, thinking it's the actor because it looked so real. So, yeah. The tiniest things are sometimes the most challenging ones on film sets, to make them safe and make sure they kind of work out the way you want to.
Now, when you say the wheelbarrow, it reminds me of another shot that I really liked, where you had silhouettes walking on the hill, heavy
Mhm.
fog. I believe the wheelbarrow was in that shot as well. Was that something you guys set up with the actors walking, or is that, I don't know, was there a trick for getting that shot as well?
No, no, no. That I mean, in the wide shot, there's actually just floppy again. There's not an actor in the wheelbarrow, so we could do that. No, that was one of our. It comes. This same shot comes back three, four times in the film. It comes in the opening of the film, and we just love. We found this forest in Hungary, which was layered with a hill, and we had the possibility to have a tracking dolly track on the lower road and have them walk on the top layer. So once we saw. But once we found that location, we knew it's perfect for this shot because we wanted to have this symbolic shot of the G7 on the journey through the forest, and that became our signature shot kind of for the film. Yeah.
Well, I also want you to tell me some more about the bog people.
Hmm.
Bog people show up a couple of times, and there's this one scene where they're around a fire. And yeah, people have seen it, are going to know what I'm dancing around here, but I'm just going to take a line from the script. Their ancient seed has extinguished the flames.
Hmm.
And all of this sort of, again, we're at high level absurdity, but also sort of these are our threatening creatures. Talk to me about that scene coming together and the bog people in general.
The bog people were interesting subject of discussion very early on when I got the mood board sent for the film because you always mention in the script, but what are the bog people? I started researching myself, and they are a very, very interesting existing findings and creatures. You find them, they're thousands of years old, and they're mummified. And you see all their wrinkles in their faces, and they just look quite. They don't look like our bog people. The references were different, but the directors really wanted them as a strong element, obviously, for the genre as well, and also kicking off the journey in a way. So we had there some Canadian, I think, special effects team which made masks and bodysuits, and then we had contortionists, actors who were able to really kind of do the weirdest movements. They could be Borg people without even their masks on. So we had basically the one Borg person we got out of the grave was like a full-on body made thing creature. But then when you see them moving around through the forest, these were actually people in suits, in those bodysuits. And the big scene, we called it a circle jerk, where they are around a fire and the ancient seed, what you described. That was very, very kind of scary, but also fun to do because you have seven of them dancing around a fire, giving this performance. And yeah, it's a very, very abstract, surreal element of the film, which gave a lot of fun to work with and very, very intense moods. I loved them as a concept, as an idea, actually.
Well, another surreal element of the film, and anyone who's watched it is saying, why hasn't he already asked about this? Talk to me about the giant brain.
Yes.
So in the script, it says giant brain, but how do you translate that into something that's actually going to be on set? You're going to film around,
Yeah.
people are going to climb on top of it. I mean, all of this just feels, besides the absurdity, very complicated to do in practical terms out in the woods.
Yeah, to begin with, I saw just pictures and concepts of the giant brain. And in the script, it actually, giant brain can be anything. It can be, but they were very specific, the directors. It was fun to see that it had to be the size of a VW Beetle hatchback kind of car. Very precise in a way.
That's a good
And
reference.
so to begin with, I didn't like pay too much attention to it because we saw them in drawings and stuff. But at some point, actually, and we just had to decide the spot in the forest where the scene is going to take place. And then one day we were there the day before shooting the scene, and art department had put it together and had built a real full scale sized giant brain. And we also had to set it on fire at the same night with Alicia Vikander on it, like at least in the film. It was a wild ride. I was wondering, how do you light a giant brain and how do you frame for it? Which lens? How do you work with that? It's surely the most surreal and absurd thing I ever had framed up in my shot. And everybody went on the day of shooting, everybody went there, touched it. It was so weird. It had a slight jelly feel to it. So it was really, really fun. Yeah, and then we had this giant brain, Alicia Vikander, next to it, and it's just been a very, very fun shoot day. We had so many fun elements which you don't get across one of these in 20 films, and here you have one film, and all these things come together, and they all, are part of this apocalyptic journey.
Now, Stefan, I've talked about some of the things that are obviously attention catching. Are there scenes that involved a challenge for you that, unless someone heard the story, maybe it wouldn't jump out at a viewer on the first watch, but maybe on a second watch, showcase your work on this?
So there was this one scene which was very, very challenging for me, where they have a long walk and talk and reciting an earlier G7 statement, the one of Rambouillet. And it's literally like a 500-600 meter walk through the forest. And how do you light that? How do you make that work? And the camera is constantly in close shots, kind of tracking alongside with them. So first we had to find a part in the forest that is long enough and also accessible enough for me to light and do this really, really long tracking shot with them. So it's a simple thing. You just see it and you don't think much about it, except for the content, obviously. But for me, this was very, very challenging to light such a long, difficult sequence with the actors. And we did that early on, so it was a big challenge to begin with. That is, I think, a good example for challenging things.
And remind me on that scene then. So did you have to cut in for coverage on that? Or sometimes when you're filming with a steady cam, that can be really difficult.
Yeah, again, the scene was covered, the scene was edited later, and we had to do coverage in this. But obviously, we had to do those long, continuous tracking shots with the actors in real time. So we wouldn't just reset after the script count and just go back and start again. So we had to just do it in one long pass, and so it was very, very challenging for me. It was like 6, 7 long takes to get them going in one piece. I think the entire film, when I watch it, and each time I rewatch it, I remember different elements, how challenging they were on the shoot, because everything day after day was so intensely packed with scenes that we had to do, and we had to kind of just I just had to kind of survive making it all work on this artistic level. And I just now, when I rewatch a film, each time I rewatch it, I remember the details of how challenging this scene was and that scene was. I think just the general thing of shooting 20 nights in a forest that night and lighting every single frame of the film and under the time constraints we had was just a long, big challenge, but also a lot of joy to kind of see it come to life and work it out and make it work. Yeah, I just even think that the opening shot of the film, as simple as it looks and it seems and it feels, there was a lot of thinking process going into it. It's basically when the G7 leaders step out of the castle, and this is kind of the signature shot of all G7 documentaries you can find online. They line up somewhere and they get their photographs taken and they kind of face the camera. So we spent a lot of time looking at dozens of different castles and spots and where is the best spot for that G7 picture postcard thing without it being too perfect. And if you remember, it's like it stayed as we seen one, I think it was from Tokyo, one original G7 meeting where it was also kind of a long plateau. Everybody stood out there and the camera slowly starts zooming in. And we want to kind of recreate a similar feeling there. And it's sometimes hard to recreate something that is just there in the real documentary world, news gathering world, when you're trying to recreate something that is cinematic, but still a strong memory of that. So we spent like, I think 2/3 of a day to just get them walking out, lining up, having their, casual interactions and a wave at the camera, and then walking back in and the camera zooming in. It looks like a very simple thing, but there's a lot of detailed work going into this shot, especially because it runs for such a long time in one setup. And it sets up the whole mood for the film. I'm really happy with that simple little opening shot of the film. Oh, one more thing comes to my mind now. The burning of the flags. At the end of it, if you remember, there's superimposed images of burning of the flags. It made us all feel quite uncomfortable shooting because you have real flags, you're burning them, and it's just a little, but it's, part of a film setup. So but it was actually more difficult than we thought because the way we wanted the flags to be there, visible for long enough, and the fire to slowly eat them up. But actually, to achieve that, because most flags today are not made out of cotton anymore, they have this plastic thing and they melt in. It took quite some fiddling until we got them to burn the way we just saw them. That was all done in camera for real. These little flag moments. It was the last thing we did at the shoot as well. Like everything was wrapped, and we just spent the last 2 hours to burn all those flags. It felt awkward to shoot the sequence, but in the film, it kind of has this dramatic apocalyptic impact, I think. So it worked out kind of to the story.
And is that the kind of scene then where your special effects department is involved very early on, trying to figure out how that's going to look? Or was it sort of a, wait a minute, these flags aren't burning the way we think. We need to do something different here.
See, I mean, just technically, you should have prepared this quite intensely, and but this was one of the things. It's just burning flags. It should be simple. So we realized on while we're shooting, we didn't have put we hadn't put too much enough thinking process into that. So it became more difficult than it actually should have been, and we're just all tired after a long night. So kind of, but in the end, we all got it to work, and it looked gorgeous and great, and it was all fine and nice, and yeah, it worked out well.
Well, this film clearly had a lot of challenges getting from concept to screen. And I really appreciate that you've come and shared some of them with us, Stefan. This was a lot of fun. On that note, we'll call it a wrap. Great having you here.
Thanks so much. It was a great pleasure having the conversation about Rumours with you. And I'm excited for the reaction of audience onto that film, seeing how they like it, and hope they enjoy it as much as I did in the process of making it.
Well, listeners, that means we both appreciate your feedback. You can find my contact info at our website, belowtheline1word.biz. That's B-I-Z. You'll also find past episodes and links to all of our social media, so check it out. Stefan, where next are we going to see your work?
You're next going to see my work, or part of my work, in the film 28 Years Later by Danny Boyle. I was a second unit cinematographer and also camera operator on that film. It was reunification with my old mentor, Anthony Mental, who I worked with on so many films, and also Danny Boyle. We worked on Slumdog Millionaire together, and they kind of, after the release of Rumours, called me if I would rejoin them to help them to be with a part of their team for the new film. So I'm very excited about 28 Years Later.
I am also looking forward to that film. Oh, Stefan, you got to come back. Let's talk about what that was like filming as well.
Yes,
I'm looking forward to it.
Yes, would love to.
My closing credits, thanks to Curtis Five for our music, John Wan for our logo, and to all of our listeners, I appreciate you. The Below the Line logo is available on t-shirts, mugs, and stickers at redbubble.com. Please rate us wherever you get your podcasts and tell your friends. Thanks again from Below the Line.